History conditions us to believe that empires fall with a deafening crash. We expect a catastrophic battlefield defeat, a dramatic surrender ceremony, or a flag being lowered for the last time. But what if a regime doesn't end with an explosion? What if it ends quietly, in a dimly lit government office, staring at a spreadsheet where the numbers simply no longer add up?
That is exactly the reality we are looking at right now. It is the silent, mathematical death of a power structure. We are watching a regime that survived over 4 decades of sanctions, protests, and international pressure finally hit the wall. And it's not because of a sudden ideological awakening. It is because the one thing that kept the entire apparatus functional, the revenue from oil, has vanished. We are looking at a staggering 94% collapse in their ability to spend money on anything beyond bare minimum survival.
94%. It's hard to even conceptualize that on a national scale. It's the equivalent of someone making $1,000 a month suddenly realizing they only have $60 left to pay their rent, feed their family, and keep the lights on. Except in this case, that $60 has to run a country of 85 million people, fund a nuclear program, and pay the security forces that keep the population in check.
Exactly. And that last part is the linchpin. We tend to view this regime through the lens of revolutionary rhetoric and theological authority. But beneath all that ideology, it is fundamentally a coalition of material interests. You have the military command structure, the clerical establishment, the civilian bureaucracy, and the security apparatus. What holds them together isn't just shared belief, it's the financial flow. When that oil revenue was choked off by the current naval blockade, dropping from 1.7 million barrels a day to a fraction of that, the coalition began to dissolve. Ideology simply does not pay the rent.
Which brings us to a fascinating, albeit dark, psychological threshold. When the money stops, the loyalty stops. We are seeing reports of military units, specifically the elite guard, going unpaid for months. You can't ask a soldier to suppress a starving population when that soldier's own family is starving, can you?
You really can't. And the data backs this up. We are seeing active desertion rates in some forward units hitting nearly 90%. Men are simply walking away from their posts. And it's not just the ground troops. Highly trained pilots are suddenly coming down with mysterious administrative or medical issues right before combat deployments. It is a classic behavioral signature of institutional collapse. The soldiers are making an individual survival calculation. When an organization can't pay you, it loses its legitimate claim on your life.
It's a profound shift. We are moving from a state of ideological protest to a state of hungry protest. And as history shows us, hungry protests do not negotiate. But before we dive into the geopolitical fallout of this collapse and how it's sparking a massive divergence between allied nations, we have a quick message to share.
The New Sentinel is a podcast dedicated to providing in-depth discussions and deep dives into a wide array of topics. From the glitz and glamour of pop culture to the strategic intricacies of military operations, we cover it all. Each episode is thoughtfully crafted to offer listeners a comprehensive understanding of the subject matter, featuring expert interviews, detailed analysis, and engaging storytelling. Whether you're a pop culture enthusiast or someone with a keen interest in global security, the New Sentinel has something for everyone. Tune in, follow, comment, and share to stay informed and entertained. And if you're a company looking to reach an engaged audience, you can advertise your product or service with us by reaching out at claebede@yahoo.com.
So, stepping back to the geopolitical chessboard, we have an internally collapsing regime, but externally, we are in the middle of a kinetic military conflict. And what's fascinating is how this is fracturing the alliance between Washington and its closest ally in the region. We are seeing incredibly tense, off-and-on negotiations. The US administration is pushing hard for a diplomatic deal, to the point of demanding that strikes in Lebanon be halted to appease the other side.
It is a massive strategic divergence, and it comes down to fundamentally different domestic pressures and survival calculations. The US administration is looking for a de-escalation win. They believe that by reining in their allies, by stopping the strikes on proxy forces in places like Beirut, they can preserve the fragile negotiations and broker a deal. But from the perspective of the allied nation actually taking the rocket fire, this logic is entirely backwards.
Right, because while the US is pausing to negotiate, thousands of projectiles are still raining down across the northern border. How do you explain to a population that has been evacuated from their homes that they must endure this bombardment because a superpower wants to keep a negotiation window open?
You can't. And this highlights a deep, almost philosophical flaw in Western negotiation tactics when applied to the Middle East. The Western approach assumes that if you show restraint, the other side will interpret it as goodwill and reciprocate. But in this specific regional dynamic, restraint is almost always interpreted as weakness. By halting the military momentum, you aren't buying goodwill. You are handing the opposing regime the exact breathing room it desperately needs to survive its own internal bankruptcy.
It's the illusion of the diplomatic off-ramp. You're offering an exit strategy to an adversary that views the very act of negotiating as a delay tactic. But let's widen the lens here, because this conflict isn't just contained to the northern border or the immediate proxy groups. The kinetic strikes have spilled over into the broader Gulf, and one country is taking an unusual amount of heat: Kuwait. Why Kuwait? With all the massive, heavily fortified targets in the region, why target a country that is smaller than Connecticut?
It is a brilliant, albeit desperate, tactical move by the regime. To understand why, you have to look at Kuwait's unique historical position. For decades, Kuwait has been the ultimate hedger of the Middle East. They try to be friends with everyone. They have a significant minority population that shares sectarian ties with the regime, and they share a highly porous, tense border with Iraq. But crucially, Kuwait also hosts the largest concentration of American military personnel in the region.
So they are essentially caught between a rock and a hard place. They are trying to remain neutral, yet they are the primary logistics hub for the very military forces currently engaged in this kinetic conflict.
Precisely, and the role of Iraq here cannot be overstated. Iraq is effectively acting as the staging ground. Because the regime has deep proxy control within Iraq, they can use Iraqi territory to launch these strikes directly into Kuwait. It gives them a layer of plausible deniability while applying maximum pressure. The strategy is psychological. The regime knows they can't penetrate the multi-layered air defenses of the larger Gulf states, but Kuwait is softer. The goal is to make the cost of hosting those foreign military bases so painful, so politically toxic for Kuwait, that the Kuwaiti government eventually cracks and asks the forces to leave.
It's a mafia tactic. You don't go after the boss. You break the windows of the local shopkeeper who pays the boss for protection, just to prove the protection is worthless. But is it actually working? Because from what I'm seeing, this strategy seems to be backfiring spectacularly.
It is backfiring on a historic scale. The regime miscalculated the cultural reaction. By hitting a civilian airport and wounding civilians in a country that has spent 30 years trying to avoid making enemies, they didn't inspire submission, they inspired rage. Instead of pushing Kuwait away from its Western alliances, these strikes are actively pushing Kuwait out of its neutral corner and directly toward the regional security umbrella. We are seeing independent journalists in the Gulf openly stating that the destruction of the regime's military assets is a necessary good. That is a seismic shift in Arab public opinion.
It really is. It's almost ironic. For decades, the regime's rallying cry was entirely focused on destroying its primary adversaries. But the moment the pressure was applied, they turned their weapons on their Arab neighbors. It has completely unmasked their true regional ambitions. They've done more to unite the Gulf states into a cohesive security bloc than any Western diplomat could have ever achieved in a boardroom.
Exactly. And it all circles back to that empty spreadsheet. The regime is lashing out in Kuwait, clinging to proxy forces in Iraq and Lebanon, and stalling in these off-and-on negotiations because they are out of time and out of money. They are hoping that if they cause enough chaos, the international community will step in, force a ceasefire, and unfreeze their assets. They are banking on the West's lack of will to see a conflict through to its definitive end.
Which leaves us with a deeply unsettling question. When a power structure realizes it has reached the end of its endurance when the soldiers go home, the taps run dry, and the accounts are empty, what is their final move? Do they accept a managed transition, or do they pull the entire geopolitical house down with them? The math is already written on the wall. The only variable left is the human reaction to the collapse. We are watching the map of the Middle East being redrawn, not by grand strategy, but by bankruptcy.